Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. One could say that John the Apostle, the gospel writer, witnessed to an organic gospel. An organic gospel. Those of you who have searched the scriptures, like Collie, right, as John Wesley would say, know that in particular John the gospel writer is not really interested in offering you a biography or a history of Jesus and who he was. John, above all, more than the other gospel writers, John wants you to get good news of Jesus. He wants you to have good news of Jesus, not information about Jesus of Nazareth. And so he picks and uses sayings of Jesus that dive deep into God's purpose for Jesus' life and God's purpose for our lives. Vines and branches. It's a very provocative metaphor, isn't it? And in using them, Jesus is trying to say a whole lot more than it's good to know who I am. It's good to know things about me. It's good to be acquainted with me. Oh, he's trying to say so much more. Vines and branches. Can the branch survive without the vine? No. Vines and branches. It's a metaphor. But Jesus uses it to point to what he really means, knowing him. Remember Yada. Knowing Jesus is more than being acquainted with him. It's actually having your very existence. It's living a life that begins and ends in his life. And Jesus is saying to us, when you abide in me, when you put your life inside my life is inside God's life, and so you have placed your life inside God's life through my life. Vines and branches. It's an organic relationship, right? It's about life and how life happens and how no life can happen without that relationship. Hold that very deep thought. This is a map that shows you what you probably already know. I just want to test, constantly testing this. This is a map that shows you how in the far western United States we have the most people who do not identify as Christians, and therefore the least number of people who identify as Christians, and the most people who don't have the least bit of interest in Christianity. In the western states, and you see particularly the northwestern states. Has this really sunk in, Centennial? Has this sunk in? We're sitting in the place that has the least interest, not in spirituality. There's great interest in spiritual meaning. But in the institutional church, not so much. If you really understand this, then I hope you also understand that if we are to be faithful in passing on the good news John worked so hard for us to live, this 2,000-year-old good news, then we're going to need some fresh expressions from the vine. From the vine. This is Matt Overton. Matt is a pastor. He was hired by the Columbia Presbyterian Church in Vancouver, Washington. Some of you have come down from Seattle. You know where Vancouver is. So Matt was a little worried about taking on this youth pastor position in a church in the least Christian part of this country, which actually I think Oregon beats Washington, which beats California in that regard. So this is what Matt said to himself. I knew that if the American church was ever going to be born again in the 21st century, it would need people willing, notice it didn't say pastors, it would need people, I'd say disciples, willing to risk everything for kingdom ideas that were worth their very blood, sweat, and tears. This is Matt Overton contemplating, how am I going to do youth ministry in the least Christian place in the United States? Well, for Matt and his wife, it happened that they were living in Northern California and they lost their home in the recession. And so moving up north to start over meant that they could only afford a fixer-upper. And so they bought their fixer-upper, and lo and behold, the people at Columbia Presbyterian were really wonderfully ready to help them as a young family. And so a lot of the people from the congregation, I imagine we could do that here. There's a lot of very talented people here, brought their skills to his house. They brought lumber. They started doing tiling. They started ripping up floors. They started doing all kinds of work with him. He's a pretty handy guy. But he was really welcoming and appreciative of all the help that they were giving. And then it turned out that, of course, a whole bunch of the young people who were part of his youth ministry wanted to come and join in too. And so, every, I think, Sunday afternoon or whatever, people would come and they'd bring what they had, their tools, and they'd all get busy. And they were going great guns, fixing, refurbishing his house. And while he was really pleased that he was getting a very nice home, he was even more pleased to watch what was happening between the young people and their elders, right? This was the one place that the young people were excited about going to. It wasn't church worship. It wasn't Sunday school. It was Pastor Matt's house rebuilding, right? They were excited. They came eagerly. They came ready to do some hard work. They came wanting to learn skills. And you know what they met? They met people there who were very patient and understanding about their inexperience. They didn't meet people who were ready to put them to work on something they wanted them to do. You know, we do that to youth. Oh, let the youth do it, right? They were respected. They had some dignity. And on the other side, some of these older folks, mostly the men, some of whom were not church goers, didn't attend worship, they were loving sharing what they knew with the young people, teaching them things along the way, right? They were having a wonderful time. And Matt is watching all this, and he's saying, this doesn't happen in the church program like this, right? Listen to what he says. I love this. He said, in youth ministry, we attract kids all the time with Cheetos, couches, and games. Why not attract them with jobs, work, and skills, right? It dawned on him as he was watching the amazing interaction and mutual growth that was happening. This is church. This is a new way of being church. And so he recruited 7 people. He started getting this bright idea, and he recruited a team of 7 people from the congregation who would work with him to begin to develop an idea of how might we do youth ministry where youth are doing ministry, not program for them, but where they are doing ministry in this kind of way, where they're interacting and they're learning and they're gaining job skills and life skills. How might we do this? And so they started exploring that idea, and they decided that probably home refurbishing was a little above them. And so they ended up deciding that landscaping could work. It was a felt need in the community, and people needed job skills for young people. And so they decided to start looking at this, fleshing it out. They explored the teen labor laws and looked into different needs. They raised money, and they began to partner with other people, both in the congregation. There were business owners in the congregation who could help them develop their business model. There were people in the congregation who had served on things like SSP, who had done mission trips, and working with young people who were working. So they kind of brought all these people together, and they came up with their plan. And this is what one of the team members said. What the team realized is that just throwing kids into jobs wasn't really our goal. Giving them tools to thrive in work, life, and faith was what we wanted to do. And that was Rachel Grice, who was one of the original 7 members. And so as they thought about this and began to dream and things began to get more concrete, they realized that they wanted to build a Christian mission. And so this was not a program for their kids. This was an opportunity to reach out to any interested teens in the whole Vancouver, Washington greater area and the suburbs around that. Anybody could come and be part of what they were creating, right? And so in June of 2015, the first trained team of teens were ready, and Mowtown Teen Lawn Care, I love it, Mowtown, not what you're thinking. Although I'd love to do that kind of church too, right? Mowtown Teen Lawn Care LLC was born. Now notice, they actually started this as a for-profit business because it was easier to get it up and going than it would have been to start a nonprofit. But all of their financials were being reviewed by the congregation. There was a special finance team that looked over their financials twice a year or twice a month. No, twice a year, I think. And they had about $10,000 seed money, and pretty quickly it got to be about $25,000. And so they really started well on their way. It didn't take long. Now the young people are supervised by crew leaders. These are adults who are also trained in safety and all the landscaping techniques and tools and all of that. And the young people are paid fair wages. They're not treated like cheap labor. And they work very, very hard. They're trained several times a year in work ethic. And they're expected to have, a really good job ethic when they leave. They're trained in all the techniques. So they're well prepared for the work that they do before they even start working. Now, here's what they're asked to bring whenever they come and show up for work or they get picked up. Gloves, sunglasses, lunch with a drink, and a notebook. And it's the notebook where all the ministry happens. I want you to know what happens with this notebook. In the notebook, each one of these young people who are working for Mowtown have to write down and share what they're thankful for in their lives, what they have accomplished in the last year that they're proud of, what they have failed at in the last year. They're sharing this, and what they want to accomplish in the year to come. You see where they're building character? And they do all this in what they called windshield time. That means on their way, on their journey to and from the work site, they are having these conversations with one another in the truck as they go, with the pastor, with the youth pastor. No matter who they are, wherever they came from in the city, they're having this quality of conversation. Not something Matt could get to with the Cheetos and the couches, right? Never quite got there. So what we're talking about is called social enterprise. You've probably heard that word. And social enterprise just means making money with the purpose of doing a social good. It's not about the profit. It's not about the profit. It's for the investors. It's about creating a social good that is self-sustaining. And a lot of congregations across the country are exploring social enterprise for ministry. And I want to share with you that right here we're dreaming of that kind of thing too. Our Fijian men are dreaming of the possibility of turning our own landscaping and janitorial work into an opportunity for people to be trained and to have a resume with experience and to be able to get employed. And our Fijian women are talking about the possibility of another nonprofit where women can be trained for the kind of care providing that they do and referrals out, because it kind of happens, right, informally, but it could happen quite seriously in self-sustaining ways. So Matt says, I want kids to leave Mowtown knowing what their gifts and talents are. This is like baptism, knowing what their gifts and talents are and how to hold down a job and what they're good at. Maybe they'll respond in faith or maybe not. But at least I've blessed those teens' lives with the ability to sustain themselves. Because they opened this to any teens, it wasn't about their middle-class congregation. You hear that, Centennial? He said, the culture around us values security and job experience for their kids, and I want to provide an environment where we do that with grace and love. Beloved community. Well, Teen Mowtown has morphed, and there is now a new nonprofit called Columbia Future Forge. Think about those words, Columbia Future Forge. What's a forge? Yes, blacksmithing, where you mold iron, right? Iron's about strength, right? So Columbia Future Forge is now a new nonprofit in Vancouver, Washington that is a teen mentoring program. And Columbia Future Forge, which Matt started, has now taken the business of Mowtown Teen Lawn Care, and it's now part of that nonprofit. And that just happened this past year. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit. That's what it means to be my disciples. I'm inspired by Matt and the risk-taking that he both understood needed to happen and that he went for, that he took the risks that he needed to take. Now, what was organic about how the teen lawn care ministry developed? What was organic about it? It didn't come from outer space, did it? What were the seeds that God had already planted in that congregation that they fed and watered into this new outreach? What was it? There's many answers. What are some of those seeds that were already in that congregation? What was? I couldn't quite hear. Love? For who? For what? Yes. Love and interest and concern for people outside the congregation walls. Yeah. What else? That was definitely there. Trust in each other. Yes. What else was there? Yes, interest in adults helping youth, in the relationship between adults and youth and young people. It wasn't segregated ministry, was it? It was integrated ministry. Nancy? Yes, the desire to meet people. We could go on and on. This is what it means, right? This is what organic growth means, Centennial. As we look into God's future for us, everything that we develop needs to come not from sending 4 people on some retreat somewhere and come back with a bright idea, but from the seeds that God already has invested here, from the vine that we live together, from the beloved community we are committed to being together. This is how God grows the mission and the ministry of God's church, not from things in our past, but from the living, risen Christ that we receive today. Will you receive Christ and give to Christ generously as they gave in Washington State and as you have given before? Give generously.